Brooklyn, New York. A late autumn evening, with a thin mist hanging over the rows of Flatbush streets. On the doorstep of Little Stars Learning Center, Sarah Klein leaned quietly against the window frame, her eyes fixed on the small playground outside. She was used to the noise and chaos of pickup time, the laughter of children, the click of parents' heels rushing up the steps, the glass door opening and closing in a steady rhythm. But today, something felt different. Sarah stood still, watching 6-year-old Sophia Torres, usually the sweetest, most obedient child in the class, suddenly burst into tears, clinging tightly to the slide post, shaking her head furiously as her father arrived. Amid the warm greetings of other parents, Sophia's voice broke through, trembling and broken, enough to send a cold shiver down Sarah's spine. Sarah squinted at the man in the suit, bending down, whispering something sharply into the little girl's ear. And just then, Sophia looked up at her, eyes wide, terrified, full of words she couldn't yet say. Sarah's fingers tightened, her gaze dropping briefly to Sophia's teddy bear, left behind on the bench. The streetlights outside flickered on, stretching the shadows of father and daughter long across the sidewalk. Sarah took a deep breath, and as the door shut behind them, one thought rang loud and clear in her mind. Something isn't right. The streets of Flatbush still gleamed with a thin sheen of rain as Sarah Klein tugged her cardigan closer around her shoulders and stepped out onto the front steps of Little Stars Learning Center, breathing in the cool evening air. Inside, the familiar sounds of children laughing and parents' hurried footsteps filled the building. But to Sarah, it all faded into a dull backdrop. Her eyes stayed fixed on the playground and back, where the last few children of the day still darted about, their bright coats flashing in the dim golden glow of dusk. And there, in the corner where the light was fading, she saw the little girl. 6-year-old Sophia Torres crouched at the base of the slide, her knees pulled tightly to her chest, her black hair sticking to her pale cheeks. Around her, other children ran and squealed, their voices high and carefree, but Sophia stayed still, gripping the metal pole of the slide so hard her knuckles had gone white. Sarah frowned faintly and found herself walking toward the window, drawn to the sight by something she couldn't quite name. She'd done this job long enough to tell the difference between a child who just didn't want to stop playing and a child who didn't want to go home. On the far side of the room, the chime of the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of a parent. Miguel Torres appeared, right on schedule. He wore a sharp gray suit, his shoes polished, his hair neatly combed. He always did, polite enough, smiling just enough, but his eyes carried a chill Sarah couldn't forget. She stayed by the eyeglass, watching him scan his QR code and stride straight through the playroom, his gaze locked on the playground and the little girl crouched beneath the slide. She didn't move. Miguel crouched, leaning close to his daughter, whispering something sharp. His hand landed lightly on her shoulder at first, then his fingers tightened, his face dipping closer to hers. Sarah felt her stomach knot, her hand clenching unconsciously around Sophia's forgotten teddy bear, still lying on the bench beside her. She remembered all the little things now. Faint bruises on Sophia's arms, how she shrank away from her father's touch, her eyes darting around when he entered the room. Sarah had always told herself not to assume, not to overstep without proof. But as she stood there and watched Miguel clamp his hand around Sophia's thin wrist and pull her roughly to her feet, something cold settled deep in her chest. Sophia stumbled after him, her other hand reaching back to the slide like she didn't want to let go of even this splintered piece of wood. Sarah followed them as far as the daycare door, stopping at the top of the stairs to watch as the man led his daughter away. He never looked back. He never did. The teddy bear in Sarah's hand felt heavier than it should have. She stood there for a long moment, the city's noise humming around her, unable to shake the chill that crawled through her. Something was wrong, and she knew, somehow, that this was only the beginning. Sarah stood frozen on the front steps of Little Stars, her hand still gripping the stuffed bear Sophia had left behind. The late drizzle pattered softly, the streetlights casting a pale yellow glow on the slick pavement. The noise of the city blurred around her, but her eyes stayed locked on the receding figures of Miguel and Sofia. Their silhouettes merged into the line of cars across the street, Sofia's small frame stumbling to keep up with her father, head bowed as if swallowing down a fear too heavy to name. Sarah glanced down at the bear in her hand, feeling a sharp pang in her gut. At first, she told herself she'd just leave it on the lost and found shelf inside, but Sofia's eyes from just minutes ago still haunted her. That look that held back a cry for help she couldn't say out loud. The way she clung to the slide post, fingers whitening, like it was her last safe place. In the chill of the Brooklyn evening, Sarah heard herself whisper, "No, I can't just let her go." Like that. And she stepped off the curb. Miguel's car, a deep red sedan, glowed faintly in the mist as its taillights flared. Sarah kept her distance, ducking behind a black SUV parked nearby, watching as he buckled Sofia into the back seat. The girl clutched a teddy bear Miguel had shoved at her, though Sarah caught his tone through the cracked window, low and cold. "Don't embarrass me again." Sofia's little hand trembled as he slammed the door shut. Sarah looked back at Tishay, the bear in her hand, realizing then it was the real one. The one Sofia truly loved. The one Miguel had handed her was just a tattered replacement, its ear crudely stitched, a poor imitation. Something hot and sharp twisted in Sarah's chest. She quickly snapped a photo of his license plate, then stuffed the real bear into her bag. Miguel's headlights lit up the street as the sedan inched forward, blending into the thick stream of traffic on Flatbush Avenue. Sarah swallowed, spun back to her own car, her old silver Civic, and slid into the driver's seat. When she turned the key, the engine shuddered to life, the whole frame vibrating as if echoing her own thudding pulse. In the rearview mirror, she caught sight of herself. Steady gaze, quick breath, no hesitation. She flipped her blinker, merged into traffic, and kept her eyes locked on the twin red taillights ahead, like a predator hunting through the haze. Miguel cut through an intersection, veering left toward Prospect Park. Sarah's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, her heart hammering, but her focus didn't waver. One thought pounded in her mind, over and over. If I look away now, who's going to save her? And so, Sarah's silver Civic melted into the Brooklyn night, following the shadows as they slipped deeper toward the trees of Prospect Park. Prospect Park at night held a grim, quiet beauty, nothing like the bustling, cheerful place it became by day. The trees loomed black and thick, layered over one another, clutching the narrow, empty road that skirted the woods. The faint rustle of leaves on a passing breeze mingled with the distant wail of car horns from Flatbush Avenue far behind. Sarah kept a safe 4 or 5 car lengths between her and the red sedan ahead, her eyes fixed on its glowing taillights. Her Civic's engine hummed low, trembling under her foot as she pressed the gas. Her hands had gone numb on the steering wheel, her chest tight, breath shallow and uneven. Miguel veered suddenly, turning off the main road and into a smaller, cobblestoned lane, dotted with weak, sputtering park lamps that barely lit the way. Sarah's pulse jumped, but she followed, creeping after him through the park's iron gates, just as the last vestiges of city light faded behind her. The sedan drove on for another 100 yards before pulling over to the shoulder, stopping at one of the park's most secluded stretches, where the lamps no longer reached. Its lights blinked out, and the darkness swallowed it whole. Sarah shivered. Through the mist, she watched Miguel step out and open the rear door. He leaned in and lifted Sofia out. The girl clutched the fake teddy bear he'd handed her, her small frame hunched and fragile. Without a word, Miguel took her hand and led her into the woods. The crunch of his shoes on dry leaves carried clearly in the still air. Sofia glanced back once, just once, and her tear-streaked eyes caught Sarah's through the yuan shadows. That single look froze Sarah's blood. She killed the engine, cracked her door open, and slid out quietly, crouching low as she followed. The sound of dry leaves breaking underfoot seemed deafening. Miguel stopped, beneath the sprawling black silhouette of an oak tree, its massive trunk disappearing into the dark canopy above. Sarah hid behind another tree, not far off. In the faint light, she saw him crouch down, pointing at the base of the oak, his voice low and sharp. Sophia shook her head, her body quivering. Miguel gripped her wrist tighter, pulled her closer to the trunk, and slapped his palm against it, like presenting something sinister. Sarah pulled out her phone, her fingers cold and stiff, and snapped several photos before switching to video. On screen, she zoomed in just enough to see his hand squeezing her shoulder, his face inches from hers, breath steaming against her hair. Then he said something that made Sophia flinch, a small, strangled sound escaping her lips before she fell silent, clutching the torn bear close to her chest, tears streaking down her cheeks. Sarah bit down hard on her lip, her knuckles white around her phone. One thought flashed in her mind. If I step out now, can I stop this? But then she remembered that glance Sophia had given her earlier, the look that said, "Help me." And Sarah knew that if she backed down now, no one would. The wind hissed through the trees, tossing brittle leaves into the air. The city lights couldn't reach this far. Only the pounding of her heart kept her grounded as Miguel's voice sliced through the stillness, quiet but cutting, as he bent over the child. "If you ever embarrass me again, you'll stay chained here, forever." The wind hissed through the trees of Prospect Park, carrying the damp, earthy scent of rotting leaves and making Sarah's skin prickle. She stood behind a tree, her heart pounding so hard it hurt, eyes fixed on the little girl cowering at the base of the oak, while Miguel's large hand stayed clamped on her shoulder. A reluctant nod from Sophia finally made him let go. The child dropped her gaze, quietly shuffling back toward the car, her eyes hollow. Sarah stayed hidden, retreating to her own car only after they disappeared from sight. She waited several long beats, then started the engine and followed, keeping her headlights low. The red taillights ahead glowed faint and sinister, cutting through the mist as the sedan glided back toward Flatbush. She kept her breath even, her Civic rolling silently in the darkness. The Torres family home stood on a quiet stretch of Linden Boulevard, a small white-painted house with a low fence wrapped in ivy. The red sedan pulled over slowly, its lights blinking out as Miguel and Sophia climbed out. Sarah parked a few houses back, killed her lights, and stayed crouched low in her seat, watching. The front door opened. Miguel shoved Sophia inside and slammed it shut behind him. The house fell silent, save for a faint yellow glow from the living room window. Sarah lowered her window slightly, straining to listen. At first, it was just muffled footsteps and doors closing. Then came a sharp, hollow thud, something heavy hitting a wall. A woman's voice rose, trembling, pained. Don't do this in front of her, Miguel." Sarah shivered. Miguel's shadow passed briefly through the window, and she caught the gleam of something metal in his hand. A hammer. His heavy footsteps thudded against the floor, his silhouette stalking through the room like a storm cloud. Sarah ducked lower, her hands fumbling for her phone, her fingers trembling as she started filming, the camera jittering in time with her breath. Inside the house, the woman's cries and the child's sobs carried through faintly, slicing through the quiet street. She bit her lip hard, forcing herself calm, and dialed 911. The operator's steady voice answered, and she poured out the details. The address, the danger, the child, the weapon, her words spilling fast, sharp, cutting through the thick fear choking the car. Minutes later, the street erupted in red and blue flashes. 2 NYPD cruisers screamed into view, sirens blaring, tires screeching. Sarah exhaled shakily, her fingers icy, her phone buzzing faintly in her hand. Officers jumped out, weapons drawn, shouting, "NYPD! Open the door! Hands where we can see them!" The door flung open. Miguel stood there on the threshold, hammer still in hand. His eyes cut straight across the street, finding Sarah in the shadows. That look, burning red with hatred, froze her breath. Then the hammer clattered to the floor. His hands went up. The officers moved in, forced him down on the steps, handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists. Sarah's grip tightened on the stuffed bear in her lap, her breath shaky. And in that instant, her gaze found Sophia again, peeking out from the doorframe, her round eyes swollen and red. And for the first time that night, Sarah thought she saw it, a faint glimmer of hope. The first step was done, but she knew the nightmare wasn't over yet. The blare of sirens, the screech of tires on wet asphalt, and the pulsing flash of red and blue lights bathed the white-painted house in a storm of color and noise. Sarah sat in her Civic, fingers gripping the steering wheel tight, heart hammering as 4 NYPD officers charged forward, guns drawn, forming a line at the foot of the porch. The wooden door burst open. Within seconds, Miguel was dragged outside. His hands shot up, his face a mask of defiance, but his eyes, those sharp, venomous eyes, darted toward Sarah, where she sat watching from the street. That look, like the slash of a blade, promising this wasn't over. The click of handcuffs rang out as they forced him down onto the steps, 2 officers pinning him as they recited his Miranda rights. He didn't resist, but through clenched teeth, he spat a curse that carried across the yard, just loud enough for Sarah to catch 2 words. You, spy. Behind them, the front door cracked open again. Another officer stepped out, carrying Sophia in his arms. The little girl clutched her ripped teddy bear, her face buried in his shoulder. When her tearful eyes met Sarah's through the car window, her small arms reached out, trembling. Sarah opened her door, her legs shaky, but her resolve steady. She stepped forward, closing the gap, and the officer gently set Sophia down before her. The child stumbled forward and wrapped herself around Sarah's legs, sobbing, her words broken and faint. "Please, save my mommy." Sarah knelt, pulling her close, feeling the child's whole body shaking in her arms. She murmured something soothing, her hand smoothing down Sophia's damp, tangled hair. Moments later, Ana Rivera Torres emerged from the house. Sophia's mother, her face bruised and swollen, her lips split and bleeding, her shoulders wrapped in a thin blanket a cop had draped over her. At the sight of her daughter, Ana collapsed to her knees, crying as she pulled the girl into a fierce embrace. "I'm here. Mommy's here now." Sarah stood to the side, watching mother and daughter clutch each other as though they might shatter otherwise. Every scream, every threat she'd heard in that house was no longer just suspicion. It was fact, a cruel, undeniable truth. One of the officers approached her, notebook in hand, his voice low but sincere. "You called 911? Thank you. You saved them tonight." Sarah just nodded, her hand still resting gently on Sophia's trembling shoulder. Farther down the walkway, Miguel was being led to a waiting squad car, his head bowed, his shoulders rigid. As he passed her, he looked up, his stare still burning with hatred. But this time, there was something else in it too. Desperation. Sarah tightened her fist, but didn't flinch. Tonight, she had won. But she knew, deep down, that for Ana and Sophia, the real fight was only just beginning. After the chaos on Linden Boulevard faded, the Brooklyn night grew quiet again, with only the red and blue lights from the squad cars casting fractured reflections on the rain-slicked pavement. Sarah stood just outside the NYPD 70th Precinct, her hands clasped together, breathing slower now, but still heavy. Inside, the room echoed with the scratch of pens on paper, chairs creaking, and papers shuffling. Ordinary sounds, but tonight they felt sharp, cold, cutting. Across from her, Ana Rivera Torres sat hunched on the wooden bench, her thin frame trembling under a borrowed blanket. Her black hair hung in disarray, hiding much of her bruised face. Beside her, Sophia clung to her mother, red-eyed, her small hands gripping the battered stuffed bear tightly. Sarah eased herself down beside them, quietly resting her hand on Anna's knee, offering what little calm she could. Anna took a long, shaky breath, then spoke, her voice low and raw. It wasn't always like this." Sarah tilted her head, watching her intently. "When I met him, Miguel was different. He was kind, patient even. Back then, he'd just started his little tech company here in Brooklyn, and I believed we'd have a good life, a real family. Her voice faltered, her hand clutching Sophia's tightening visibly. Then, everything changed when he met her. A coworker. That woman, she used him, bled him for everything. Money, shares in the company. And then pushed him out. He came home with nothing after 10 years. And the way he looked at me, it was like everything was my fault. Like I wasn't enough, never enough. Anna's words caught in her throat, and she fell silent for a moment. At first, just cruel words, then the slaps, then worse. Some nights he dragged me to the kitchen, slammed my head against the wall in front of her, telling me if I didn't shut up, if I ever tried to leave, we'd both disappear. Me and Sophia. Sarah bit the inside of her cheek, her hand tightening on Anna's. Anna looked down at Sophia, her eyes softening briefly before she raised them back to Sarah's. I wanted to run. I really did. But he said, if I ran, she'd pay the price. I couldn't risk it. So I stayed. I thought I could shield her from the worst of it. But she saw. She always saw. A detective appeared from inside, holding a clear evidence bag. He gave Sarah a slight nod before setting the bag on a nearby table and unsealing it. Inside, Sarah caught sight of a steel chain, a pair of rusty handcuffs, and a small GoPro camera with a memory card still inserted. What was he going to do with those? Sarah asked, her voice quiet but heavy, though she already feared the answer. The detective shook his head grimly. We're still checking. But if you hadn't called tonight, it might already have been too late. Sarah looked back at Anna. The woman bowed her head, her thin shoulders shaking, tears cutting down her bruised cheek. If you hadn't followed, I don't dare imagine what would have happened. I owe you both our lives, Anna whispered, her voice breaking with equal parts shame and gratitude. Sarah squeezed her hand tighter, leaning closer, murmuring just loudly enough for all three to hear. I promise. It'll be different now. In the quiet precinct room, Anna's muffled sobs blended with Sarah's long exhale, and Sophia's little fingers clung tight to Sarah's sleeve, as if she'd never let go. It was nearing 2 a.m. when Sarah rose from her seat and walked slowly down the hallway of the NYPD 70th Precinct, her steps feeling heavier with every stride. The tension in the station had eased somewhat, but fatigue hung in the air like a cold fog. The harsh fluorescent lights made the dark circles under her eyes stand out, her face drawn from the long, harrowing night. Interrogation Room 3 was lit. The door was ajar. Sarah peered through the crack and saw Miguel inside, sitting with his hands cuffed in front of him, head bowed. He looked nothing like the proud, intimidating man who'd glared at her hours earlier. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his eyes hollow. A detective came up quietly beside her, his voice low. "Want to hear?" Sarah only nodded. The detective eased the door open a little more, and through the faint hum of the precinct, Miguel's voice could be heard, hoarse, bitter, but edged with exhaustion. He spoke of his tech company, how he'd built it from nothing, working himself into the ground to reach what he thought was his dream. Of how a coworker, that woman, as he called her, had lured him into an affair, manipulated him into signing away control of the company, piece by piece, and then cut him out entirely. Miguel's voice sharpened. "I woke up one day and realized I was nothing. She erased me from everything. And when I came home..." Anna looked at me with those pitying eyes. Sarah stayed silent, letting each word sink like a blade into the air around them. Miguel went on, admitting he'd started drinking, then hitting Anna just to see fear in her eyes. And then he'd noticed Sophia feared him even more than her mother. Twisted and broken as he was, that fear became his only measure of control left. He even laughed dryly when he spoke of Prospect Park. That tree. It was a warning. I told her if she ever embarrassed me, if she ever made me look weak, I'd leave her chained there, make her a lesson for her mother. She believed it. The way her eyes went wide, it made me feel powerful again. Sarah turned away, icy rage curling through her veins, her fists clenching at her sides. The detective closed the door softly and muttered, "We've got enough. With your video and the mother and kid statements, he's not walking away from this." Sarah gave a tight nod. She returned to the waiting area. Anna was still seated there, her head resting against the wall, her eyes closed, her face tired but lighter now. Sophia slept curled up in her mother's lap, clutching her real teddy bear, her little fingers gripping the edge of the blanket as if afraid it might all be a dream. Sarah sat beside them, her gaze fixed on the child, her hand resting gently on Anna's shoulder. Anna opened her eyes, meeting Sarah's quietly, and whispered, "If it weren't for you, I'd never have had the courage." Sarah only squeezed her hand and whispered back, "This was never your fault, never." The night wasn't over yet, but at least Sarah knew. The worst of the nightmare was over. For now. And as her eyes lingered on Sophia, her eyelids fluttering faintly, her small face more peaceful than it had been in months, Sarah silently promised she would never let that little girl feel afraid again. It was close to 3 a.m, and the precinct had finally quieted down. Only a few night officers moved about, their radios crackling occasionally, breaking the stillness. Sarah sat alone on the station steps, cradling a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold, the streetlights casting a faint yellow glow over her tired face. The Brooklyn night was black and chill, the occasional late taxi gliding past. Sarah tilted her head back to stare at the murky sky, her chest still tight, her heart beating slow and heavy now that the adrenaline had faded, leaving only fatigue. Inside, Anna and Sophia still waited in the same spot. The mother sat, slumped against the wall, clutching her daughter as if shielding her from the world. Sophia slept soundly, her cheek resting on her real teddy bear, her tiny fingers gripping the edge of the blanket like she was afraid it might all disappear. A young officer stepped out, handing Sarah a fresh cup of coffee. "You did good tonight. Not many people would have had the guts." Sarah gave him a faint, weary smile and nodded, though deep down she didn't feel like she'd done anything remarkable, only what had to be done. If she'd walked away like everyone else, those two wouldn't still be sitting there now. She stood and walked back inside. The harsh white lights of the station fell on the wooden bench where Anna had just opened her eyes, looking at her with a quiet, exhausted calm. Sarah sat down beside her, and neither woman spoke, just listening to the faint, even breaths of the sleeping child. A senior detective approached, handing Sarah a slim folder. "Child Services will take them to a safe location in the morning. You can wait here and see them off, or go home and rest. We've got your full statement on file." Sarah flipped through the folder. Just a name, an address, a few dry lines summarizing the night. Words on paper couldn't capture what she'd seen in Sophia's eyes. She closed the folder and turned to Anna. The woman's lips trembled as she whispered, "I don't know what to say. But thank you. I owe you my life." Sarah shook her head firmly, her voice low but resolute. "You don't owe me anything. Just keep her safe. That's all that matters." Anna lowered her gaze and hugged her daughter tighter, tears glistening as they fell silently down her bruised cheek. Sarah quietly brushed a strand of hair off Sophia's forehead, smoothing it down as though she could calm not just the child's fears, but her own. Outside, dawn had yet to break. Brooklyn still slept, but Sarah knew this night had already changed everything, for them and for her. She pulled out her phone, scrolling to the photo she'd taken of the red sedan parked in Prospect Park, the glistening, tear-streaked eyes of Sophia reflected through the car window. She deleted it, then looked back at the girl sleeping in front of her, and slowly nodded to herself. "You're safe now. It's not over yet, but you're safe." And for the first time all night, the faintest hint of a smile touched Sarah's lips, vanishing as quickly as the cold wind rattling the Brooklyn windows. Morning broke. The first pale streaks of pink tentatively crept over the low rooftops of Flatbush, washing the quiet street in soft gold. The precinct had settled down, the night shift quietly handing off to the morning, the steady tap of keys and murmured greetings filling the air. Sarah stood on the front steps, her hands buried deep in her coat pockets, her hair loose and messy. After the long night, her eyes felt heavy, but somewhere deep in them, a calm had begun to settle. She tilted her head back and breathed in the fresh morning air, faintly scented with coffee from the corner bodega, and felt, for the first time, just a little lighter. The station door opened. A social worker appeared, leading Anna and Sophia outside. Anna wore a borrowed police sweater, clutching her daughter close. Sophia still held her real teddy bear, her puffy brown eyes glancing around shyly, but without the desperate fear from before. Anna stopped at the steps, turning toward Sarah. Their eyes met. Anna walked closer, slowly, her trembling hands reaching to take Sarah's. She squeezed them, her voice hoarse and full of emotion. You gave us our lives back. More than once. I don't even know how to thank you. Sarah returned the squeeze, nodding gently. You don't have to thank me. You and your little girl, you deserve peace. That's all. Anna bent to kiss Sophia's forehead, then followed the social worker to the waiting van. Sarah stayed on the steps, watching as the vehicle pulled away. Through the rear window, Sophia turned and looked back, and this time she smiled, small, fragile, like the first fragile light of dawn. Sarah smiled back, faintly, but it reached her eyes. Flatbush was waking up now. The first bus rumbled down the avenue, shopkeepers opened their metal gates, and life continued as if the nightmare of the night before had never happened. Sarah turned and began walking slowly down the sidewalk, hands still in her pockets, her eyes distant, fixed on the dark silhouette of Prospect Park in the distance. The trees there were now bathed in early sunlight, the darkness banished, replaced by warm green and gold. She knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead for Anna and Sophia would still be long, still full of challenges. But at least they had taken their first step out of the nightmare, and so had she. Before turning onto the side street that led to her apartment, Sarah paused, reaching into her pocket and feeling the soft fabric of a small stuffed bear, the real one she'd kept for herself, a quiet promise to the little girl who'd trusted her. She closed her hand around it, bowed her head slightly, and whispered silently, "You're safe now, little one, and you always will be." A breeze swept past, carrying the scent of fresh leaves and sunlight that warmed her face, softening her smile into something real. The dawn had come to Brooklyn, and with it, hope had returned.